Okay, I think it's exactly 4 o'clock, so let's get started. Thanks for coming, everyone. My name is Paul Caron, and by day I'm a tax professor. So I thought we could spend half an hour chatting about this new ruling that just came out. As advertised, I'm here 1 year later. In May of last year, I purchased the other 50% of the Law Professor Blogs network that my partner owns, and so I now own 100% of the network, and I undertook a redesign last year, and I unveiled it at Cali, and I sort of set forth what I was hoping we'd accomplish in the redesign. So I was going to chat about that a bit and some broader themes. Also, one other thing has changed in a year. I was on the faculty at the University of Cincinnati for over 20 years, and since August, I get to live there at Pepperdine. So that's where I am now. So I thought I would talk just briefly about how the network was formed 10 years ago on April 15th, of course. I started TaxProp, and the idea sort of was to provide a source that primarily tax academics at the beginning would find helpful to come to for tax news and information. And so that was the idea, and indeed sort of folks started to come, and so we got the idea that if it worked in tax, it would work in other areas of law, and I found law professors at other law schools to start blogs in other areas of law. And so that's where we sort of combine sort of forces and have over 50 blogs in various areas of law. And we're now sort of getting about 30 million page views a year. So we're extremely happy with that reception that the blogs have gotten. And here's a list of most of the major blogs that we have. And within that list, some have higher traffic than others, but I actually, being a tax person, I'm a numbers person, so every quarter I sort of tally up the page views of all of the blogs that our professors run, and of the top 50 blogs, 22 of them are in our network. And so part of my desire in giving this talk is I'm sort of hoping that folks will go back to their schools, and if faculty teach in other areas that we don't have covered, would love to continue to expand. Since we started the network, we've always had one of the 3 major law school publishers as a sponsor. So that pays the bills to sort of keep everything sort of going, and provides revenues to share with the editors. And so for the past 5 years, Aspen has been our sponsor. And so, as I said then, last May, we came up with this idea to sort of hire a professional and redo the site. And the big reason was that the old site wasn't optimized to be able to be used through some various devices. And so if you come to our site with any of those devices, you ought to have a sort of optimum experience. We've incorporated now sort of better social media, given our editors more sort of tools. We've installed Google Analytics on all of the blogs, and so we have a trove of information on who's coming and what they're looking at. And then, sort of frankly, we sort of wanted to better monetize things for our editors and for the network. And so, the sponsor, Aspen, controls this space on all of the blogs, and so they advertise an appropriate book on all of the blogs, and there's a recognition in the sort of header that they're the sponsor, and then also sort of now then there's other space for advertising. There's a header on the top of all of the blogs, and there's ad space on the sort of side, and so on tax, Georgetown has put up an ad on the tax site. So all of those revenues come into a pot and get shared among the editors. Something else we've done recently in accordance with other media, I should turn this on, companies, we have sponsored posts that are labeled as such. And so, for example, sort of West sort of paid to have their evidence book talked about on the evidence sort of blog. So that's another way that we have to have our sponsors be able to participate. And so we've done various surveys of who's coming to the blogs, and so roughly a third are academics, little over a third are practitioners, and then students and others, other folks who are coming to the blogs. What I want to do is kind of talk about how I think sort of this fits in to a faculty member's life at a law school, right? What's the role of doing this activity for a faculty member? And of course, if you're talking about how to measure performance, kind of rankings, right? Law school success now, U.S. News, unfortunately, is sort of the primary yardstick that people use in measuring a law school. And on measuring sort of faculty success, right, Brian Leiter, who's a part of our network, he and others have developed kind of 4 ways of evaluating our faculty on the scholarly front: reputation surveys, publication counts, citation counts, and SSRN downloads. And I'm not here advocating in any way that those measures are the only measures, or indeed the best measures. There's a whole lot more that goes into sort of faculty performance, but unfortunately, that's the state of the business now. That those are the sort of 4 ways we currently sort of count. I gave a talk at ALS about what I call sort of building a faculty member's scholarly brand, and the point of that sort of was to have a more sort of richer view of what it means to be a productive faculty member. And as a part of that, I sort of argued that social media and blogs can be, and indeed are a part of sort of many faculty members' lives. But as I said, there's so much sort of more data that we ought to have to be able to evaluate and measure and rank sort of faculty than we do now currently. So I kind of wanted to just sort of talk a bit about that, and it allows me to dig up an article that I wrote 10 years ago, anticipating some of this, and it allowed me to talk about three of my favorite things: law school, numbers, and baseball, right? Kind of all wrapped into one. I assume you've all either seen the movie or read the book, so right? But it's a fascinating tale of how baseball was run inefficiently, right, for over 100 years, where sort of teams had imperfect sort of ways of measuring how much an individual player contributed to the success of his team. So, right, they had sort of very rudimentary metrics, batting average, home runs, RBIs, wins, loss, earned run average, right? And so for over 100 years, these were the metrics, and they didn't translate very well into predicting how much an individual player would actually help a team sort of win, right? And as you know, right, this guy, Bill James, who was at the time a night watchman in Kansas City, he sort of applied sort of math and technology and began this movement to better sort of measure how individual players' performance translated into a baseball team kind of winning. And so he sort of spawned this revolution that became known as sabermetrics, sort of where people with, at the time, kind of new technology and computing's power were able to assemble vast amounts of data to be able to sort of measure individual players and how their performance affected the team. So much so that just down the street every year at MIT, they sort of have an annual sort of conference where folks present papers pushing the frontiers on measuring performance in sports, right? And what was interesting is Billy Beane then, who was the general manager of the Oakland A's, he was the first one in baseball where he didn't invent the data, but he was the first one to realize its importance and the first one to apply the data to a team. And so for Moneyball documents how for 5 years the Oakland A's seriously overperformed based upon the payroll of the team, because the market for players was inefficient. Other teams were focused on the imperfect statistics for 100 years, and he was the one who used these new data. And so for a period of time, he outperformed, right? And so folks asked him, why did you cooperate with the book, right? Because, you know, he lost his secret sauce, right? Because of the book and movie. And indeed, over the subsequent 8 years, he lost his edge, right? Because other teams hired smart Ivy League
math people who came into their front offices and started to apply the same advanced statistical sort of measures. And so I'll come back to Billy Beane in a bit. So I argue that sort of law school is where baseball was before Moneyball, right? Still using imperfect information on how to track sort of faculty contributions to our school's success. So, right, that these are all that's being done now, generally to measure that, and just like with the old baseball data, seems to be imperfect, right? And so I think what is inevitably going to come are, big data is changing all sorts of industries, it's changing legal practice, and it's going to begin to change our schools, and we're going to have to come up with better ways of measuring ourselves, right? So who's going to be the Bill James or the Billy Beane of legal education? Someone needs to be, right? So as I say, these are the four historical ways that we've had to sort of measure faculty performance. So I modestly say, well, blogs ought to be a piece of that. Certainly not a controlling piece, but a piece of a bigger picture. And what's interesting is, in my own case, the scale of numbers has sort of changed, sort of, right? That if you count publications, I've written 50 law review articles and books. Those have been cited 550 times, been downloaded 25,000 times, but Tax Prof has had 50 million page views. So I'm not sure what that says, but it's sort of interesting how these various measures look next to each other. So what kind of data should we have in measuring faculty performance, right? In the baseball world, there's this expression, scouts look for players with high tools, right? Ike Trout for the California Angels is held out as the best young player in baseball because he combines, he hits for average, for power, he has speed, a powerful arm, and he's a great sort of fielder, right? So what does it mean to be a 5'2" law professor, right? We could spend all kinds of time filling in those categories, and I sort of have in some other talks, so I'll just leave that hanging out there. So a piece I wanted to kind of add is there was this interesting article in the New York Times in February talking about how technology has sort of changed businesses in two very, very different ways, right? And a couple of books sort of take competing views of how technology changes industries, right? The first blockbusters, the idea is that in certain industries, sort of like music and movies, a couple of big stars rule the roost, so, right? They get all of the sort of spoils, or almost all of the sort of spoils. And so the idea is you compete best by grabbing those big stars in those industries, and you win. Then Chris Anderson has a different view, and other businesses, and he holds out Amazon as an example, right? That they have made their mark sort of not with the big blockbuster, but instead selling a lot or selling a little of a lot of things, right? And so he has this supply demand curve, and so the blockbuster view of the world is, you ought to focus here, right, and find whoever are the superstars in the field, because the old bromide was 20% of the stars produce 80% of the revenue, right? But Anderson argues that sort of no, what Amazon has shown is if you extend the tail, right, you can make more if you sell more products. And so I actually wrote about sort of this in the context of how does this apply to Eagle Scholarship? Is it the sort of stars who dominate, or is it the long tail? And at one level, it's eerie how it looks very much like the blockbuster model, that if you take citations or SSRN downloads, 20% of faculty are getting about 80% of the citations and downloads, right? So it looks very much like that traditional blockbuster view. And but in the paper, though, I argue that because of technology, that's starting to shift, right? And so if you compare instead new downloads, right, they're less dominated by the top 20%, and instead there's a lengthening of the performance. And so in that paper, I sort of argue that I think technology is pointing towards it becoming kind of more of an extended long tail for a host of reasons I won't go into here. What does Moneyball then have to say about now, where things are? And recall, I mentioned how Billy Beane lost his mojo right after Moneyball was published, and other teams became aware of the advantages of these some more sophisticated measures. Then the Oakland A's performance got worse, and so he no longer sort of out-competed his payroll to the same extent that he had done before. But what's interesting, though, is he's back now, right? The Oakland A's, this morning I checked, right? They've got the best record in baseball, right? And their payroll is still 25th, right? And so he's done that for the past 3 years, right? And so there have been some folks commenting about how he has found a sort of second competitive advantage above others again, right? And so the folks are saying that he's abandoned this blockbuster view of building a team or an organization, and instead adopted or the view of sort of finding 25 players who each contribute and are complementary to each other instead of relying on a few sort of stars to produce the results, right? And so what's remarkable is, right, we just saw this last week. If anyone's an NBA fan, right, San Antonio embodies this idea of sort of the team and players having a role all the way down the sort of bench, and indeed in the NBA Finals, all sorts of players on the Spurs contributed, as opposed to the Miami Heat, relied on the big blockbusters, right, the big three. And it's sort of interesting, in the NFL this year, right, the same thing happened, right? The Seahawks, again, because of various sort of factors, spread their payroll kind of more broadly throughout the sort of team, and had kind of more contributors by more players on the team. And even here in Boston, sort of, right, the Red Sox last year, not this year, by every measure, they severely overperformed, and that there was this idea that they had assembled various sort of parts instead of sort of having the overwhelming commitment to only a few stars on the team. When I was a kid growing up in Boston, the line was 25 players, 25 cabs, if anyone is a Bostonian, right? Because the story was that the guys hated each other on the team. They all kind of went their own way, and they were all about themselves. And so it was refreshing last year to sort of see that that's not how they operated last year. And indeed, there's some evidence of it working, right? And so this, I'd argue, Billy Bean and others are now realizing throwing money at blockbusters, the sort of big stars, seems not to be the sort of way to succeed. The Angels this year are sort of underperforming again compared with their payroll. And so I guess the idea is, sort of stop overinvesting in these superstars who do all of these things, and instead invest in sort of getting contributions out of the whole team, right? And so the idea is that the whole is greater than the sum of their parts, sort of, right? And that there's something magical that happens with the Spurs and the Seahawks and the Oakland A's and the Sox last year, kind of where if you have everyone contributing in different ways, it leads to more organizational success. And so I guess, that's what I've been pitching when I've talked about sort of rankings at other schools, where I think this sort of high tool law professor, right, doesn't exist, right, because there's a whole host of things that go into what a faculty member should be doing, right? And no one is going to excel at all 5 of these things, and I'm sure I missed a whole sort of host of things, right? But the idea is to have deans, think more of faculties like a team, sort of, right? And all faculty members have strengths and weaknesses, and so the idea is, in building a faculty, you ought to build a faculty of sort of folks that have complementary sort of skills that can help a school succeed on all of these fronts, right? And so I modified the supply demand curve, right, to sort of say, what kinds of things should we have sort of faculty spending time on? And sort of certainly scholarship belongs here, sort of, right? But it's not the only thing, right? Especially in today's law school sort of world, right? There's a host of things that faculty need to do to help contribute to a law school's success. And so I think the case to be made is you need a host of faculty kind of doing and sort of helping in various ways, and in the end, it'll build a stronger sort of team. So we came a long way from blogs, I'm sorry, but I think that when I think about how I spend my time, I'm sure Pepperdine would not want 25 faculty like me, right? But that kind of fits into what I hope is the point here, where I think the different faculty have different interests and sort of skills, and a good dean ought to assemble complementary pieces and have all of them kind of work to the ultimate success of the school. So that's my spiel, and I'd be happy to have a conversation about blogs or any of this stuff. And I should advertise there's a talk tomorrow at what time? 11, is it? On kind of metrics, I think?
Yes, it's going to be on alt metrics, and I believe it's actually in this room too.
Yeah, so
Well, thank you for the plug.
if you're interested.
I was going to say, everybody go back and watch the tape. It was not there yesterday.
But anyway. So, yes.
I have a question more about the blogs. Although it does float into the 5 features of the professor. How do the individual professors in the network currently, how do they come to get motivated to blog in the first place? In the absence of being rated on it, what compelled them to do it, and to do it in such an organized fashion?
Well, I think probably everyone comes at it from a different perspective. For me, it was a selfish motivation, where when I was a young faculty member at Cincinnati, I was basically the only tax professor there. And so when I started, I felt very isolated sort of there. And so I was motivated by a desire to build a community of folks that I could be able to talk about, teaching issues and scholarly issues with. And so I started, and so this was back in the early 90s, when email kind of was the new kind of big thing. And so I started an email listserv for tax professors. And so sort of that was successful, and it's still ongoing, and it's been a great way to have this kind of virtual community of folks where I know them through the listserv. And from there, then when SSRN was starting up, they asked me to be the editor of the tax journal because of the community that had developed around tax prof. And so from there then, when the whole blog thing sort of happened, several people asked me, are you going to start a tax blog? And I said, why in the world would I do that, right? But then it kind of seemed that it was the next logical place to build this community, so right? And so that was my story, that I was looking for some ways to build community. I think with many of these folks, it became a very efficient sort of way to get known in a field. So, right where, so often in our world, we have an idea and we spend months doing a review article and it gets accepted, and the publication is probably 18 months after the idea was formed. And so I think a lot of folks are attracted to having a sort of vehicle that they're able to inject their ideas into the community right away. And an example is the DC Circuit came out today with an important tax case. And so I've got 2 tax professors that specialize in that area are doing op-eds for tax prof for over the weekend. And it's a great way to be able to be out there early, sort of with the developments in your field. So I think it takes a certain kind of person, I think, who likes to do that. I mean, some folks like to take 18 months to get everything nailed down on something, whereas I think other folks kind of like a vehicle. When something happens, they're able to get out their views. So that's a thought, I think, why some people do it. Nobody does it for the money, I don't think. I mean, but I did want to explain kind of how it works and how we keep the lights on.
Yeah, there's a scientist that I did a little bit of research on, and he wrote a really great blog about why he started blogging. And what he found was he kept coming back to questions that students were asking in class that he wanted to take further, but he wanted to explore it. Mm-hmm. And so that's actually why he started blogging, was that it was inspired from, it wasn't something where he wanted to write a formal journal article that would be peer edited and going through that whole process. It was just that, somebody in my class brought this up and I want to talk about it a little bit more. Or that was an interesting concept or something that I wasn't familiar with. But now he's going into, and he was actually blogging about why he does Twitter, and he actually uses Twitter as storage. And so he punches the questions and he'll go and do a lot of research on it, and then he pushes all those articles through Twitter. So he's actually going across the different social media platforms to get his message out.
And that's kind of my spiel about building your brand. And I think in today's world, this can certainly be a piece of developing your own contacts and your own reputational kind of capital in the field. And what's sort of interesting is we did a conference here in the old building, I guess, or over there, I've lost my way, somewhere, about 8 years ago when blogs first came on the scene. This was 2006. And so the conference was about how do law blogs fit into legal scholarship. And what was interesting sort of then, and I think has continued to this day, is that the most popular law professors who blog generally are active sort of scholars in their own rights, right? Eugene Volek, right, Ryan Leiter, others, and so it's kind of interesting that it's the same personality traits or work ethic or whatever that it's the same folks, and so I would have thought by now, they'd be kind of more folks that are doing blogging in lieu of that other stuff, but almost to a person, it's folks that blog as a part of being engaged in the marketplace of ideas.
How much input do you get from practitioners as distinct from academics? Because some of the listserv, the ALS listservs, like Contracts One I know, some of those functions are being met by being able to run through things that you talk about in class or questions that keep coming up from students. But one thing that really is a drawback about those is it is just academics, it's nobody practicing. How much do you get influence from those?
Well, and I guess with influence is sort of two different ways, right? There's, well, I'm going the wrong way, right? Oh, I've lost my train of.
Oh, you just keep going back to Malibu as far as
I had a reader. Yeah. Yeah, and you're right that our email listserv is only academics, right? And that has its own, as you say, there's a lot of limitations on having an academic listserv, one of which is ideological, frankly. And so, but if you're asking on blogs, how some blogs have more active interchange with their sort of readers through comments. Like I think the sort of Volek conspiracy has probably the most, I think, or that I'm aware of, as sort of two-way exchange where it's readers, and I assume some are practitioners and some are other folks, respond to what Eugene and others write, and then Eugene and others weigh in. I frankly, I don't do that in tax, because my own, and perhaps con law is different than tax, but I sense throughout the 10 years has been that why folks find tax prep, I hope, helpful, is I've always had this vision that academics as well as practitioners are overwhelmed with information, right? That they don't have time. They don't want to get into a debate with me about a topic. I think they're looking for me or sort of someone to be able to take all of the information that's thrown out every day and say, here are the 3, 4, so 10 sort of things that I think are interesting that have happened in tax that you'll find of interest in your world, right? And so I think I act more as a sort of filter, right? And add value to them where I'm able to pull out sort of things and see connections that I'll be able to feed them information. The affirming thing is the feedback for me has been about a third of the content that I post every day comes over the transom, where I have sort of readers, some at the IRS, Treasury, big law firms, small law firms, and so I get a constant lot of emails saying, hey, did you not notice? And like this DC Circuit case, the lawyer that argued that sent me that today and said, hey, I think that this is important, you should put it on your blog. So for me, you know, that's where the sort of feedback comes from, because I wouldn't know of half the stuff that I'm able to put on my blog, other than readers who aren't informed readers send to me. I mean, being out there, I have a lot of wackos who send me things that I delete. But in some ways, I feel almost like Woodward and Bernstein, because I have, like, some people at the IRS will send me things, or some people in the Department of Justice sent me things. Lois Lerner sent me how to drive on a computer. I didn't know what it was, so I threw it away. But I'm bummed. So I think different blogs probably have different ways of getting that feedback. But the thing I found most rewarding was I built this, I thought, for faculty, and it was nice that then practitioners find it of value. Like, I'm told that some of the big tax departments in big firms, you know, they read it and they tell their associates to kind of read it. So there's feedback loops like that, I think, that happen. Yes?
So we were wondering this morning, because I've always been amazed by the amount of work that you put into this. How many emails do you get a day on this? It's a lot, huh?
How many emails do I get generally, or because of the blog?
No, because of this. How do you filter? What's your process for?
How do you do this?
Yeah.
Well,
it's just overwhelming.
Well,
I like the how many emails, yeah.
I probably get 200 emails about tax stuff a day. But I have kind of filters, and so I don't see an awful lot of the kind of wacky ones. So to get filtered out, I also have RSS feeds that I sort of set up to kind of send me information. I mean, and I'm the only one who kind of does a blog as annually as mine. I mean, I do spend an awful lot of time, and my wife tells me it's because when I was a kid, growing up here, my goal was to play first base for the Red Sox, and I played baseball through high school and through college, but it just was not going to happen. And so then my alternative dream was I wanted to be Peter Gammons, for anyone that's grown up around here. He was and he's alive still, but at the time he was a sports writer for the Globe, and he wrote about the Red Sox every day. And so I thought, well, boy, that's my dream job, right? So my wife thinks that I'm fulfilling that niche by being the Peter Gammons of the tax world, right? That I'm the bard of tax, somebody called me. And so I don't know, and it takes a lot of time, but it's affirming to have people kind of read it and find it of use. And being a tax person and liking numbers, right, it's addicting to be able to sort of see who's on it, how many are on it, what are they doing? Oh, there's someone from Cravath on it now, right? What are they looking at, right? So it's affirming, but I tell everyone, not everyone who blogs has to do it that way, where, most people, we ask them to build an audience, you need to have, I think, fresh content. And so when we start a new blog, we ask folks to have at least sort of one new thing every day, right? And we tell people generally it's better to have a co-editors on the blog to sort of help you meet that. And so, for example, we have several blogs that have five editors on them. And so they'll say, I'll do Monday, you do Tuesday, so it does not become an overwhelming thing. And so that, I think, makes it more manageable to have more folks involved. And I've thought of adding folks to TaxBar through the years, but I'm like a proud father. I think it's like my voice now, and if I add other people, it'd be great and probably better, but it would kind of change the voice on the blog, so to speak.
To that point, can you give some insight into your workflow? I mean, how you get an RSS feed or you get something, do you then just draft? Do you do what you would outline? How do you do it?
Yeah, well, the software works where you can schedule posts, right? And so that's the way that I kind of manage my own workload, where I sort of limit the number of posts that I'll do in a day, because otherwise it can become even more overwhelming. And so, for example, one of the things that I do on the blog is, if I can find a good example, like Allison Christians sent me this, that she was doing this symposium, and would I put that on the blog and have a link to the papers there. And so she sent me that 2 weeks ago, or early this week. And so I'm able to, write that at 8 at night at home, and schedule that to publish on Friday morning. So that's a piece of it that you're able to kind of manage the sort of work. I don't think that's directly responsive to what you asked.
So you get this email from her.
Right.
How does it go from that to this?
And so the software is very user-friendly. So it is basically you cut and paste the email or material on the web, and then it converts that into all the HTML sort of coding that you need, and you schedule the post to appear on a certain day and on a certain time. Kind of more generally, if you're asking, are you asking like, how do I tell what things to put on the blog and what things?
How do you write it?
And that's more art than science. So I have to make snap judgments about what I think my hypothetical academic or practitioner is going to be interested in. And so, and I think the different editors do a better or worse sort of job, because I think that's what people come to the blogs for, that do you have interesting sort of content that they otherwise might not have. And so, for example, I get emails from almost every sort of tax reporter for the Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg, send me their things when they write them, and I always put them on the blog because they tend to be interesting. If it's in the Journal of the Times or Bloomberg, I'll sort of put that on the blog. But if I get other stuff from somewhere that I think sort of folks would not be as interested in reading, I ignore it, kind of thing. So it's more of an art data science, I think.
The other thing, oh, sorry.
Oh,
The other thing too is that a lot of times you can kind of make up your own rules. I'm really good friends with Greg Lambert from 3 Geeks, and his rule is if something takes him more than an hour to write, he's not going to write it. And so he'll sit down and he'll start to try to write it, but if it's not coming, he's like, okay, can't write about that. Need to ask one of the other authors to step in. So sometimes you can kind of make up your own rules for what works for you and your workflow. Since he's busy and he works for a firm, that works the best for him.
Yeah, and one of the things with this idea to build a community of tax folks, sort of now, when any tax professor presents a paper, I try to put that on the blog. And so sort of now, almost, I would guess, over half of the people when they go to another school to present a paper will send me an email saying, hey, I'm going to Harvard tomorrow, would you mind putting this on the blog? You don't do that though. You gotta start sending me your stuff. I'm gonna find you the hard way, because there are guys like him that don't help me out, but I have.
That's why I'm here.
Okay. But almost all schools now have their faculty workshops areas on the web, and so I've set up these RSS feeds where I get pushed, sort of when faculty are speaking at those other schools, and then there's about 12 law schools that have a tax workshop series, and almost all of them will send me emails saying we have Professor X coming in next week. So I think that's kind of a nice feature of tax blog, because people like to read about what different people are writing about and presenting. So that's something that I do. We're almost out of time. If any folks are interested, some of us are going to, I have to get the name right, the Russell House Tavern for an after-conference drink. If anyone's interested, we could continue the conversation then, but in any event, thanks for coming.
Is procedural taxing one of your jobs?
No, but I've been talking with them about having them join us.
Yes.
I think they're doing a super job.
They are
with
good.
that.
It's an interesting niche and different take. I think, particularly for one on taxpayer community, that's just.
They're doing a great job, yeah. And in fact, somebody dropped the ball. I'm not sure if it's me or them, but we've had conversations about them joining, and there's some hoops they have to jump through, and I forget where it is. Yeah, no, it could be me.
We had a conversation, we didn't realize we were both kind of talking about the same
I think
thing,
they're
because
gonna-
our 2 descriptions were different. But yeah, mine's gonna be a lot more theory based
I don't
on
understand some
kind of different, what I think
All
the
the metrics and
next,
all that.
the
They seem
workflow
to be.
for law professors should be, what they should be doing when they write something. It is tomorrow.
This, which is for all of that. I mean, the original
10:30
thing was that they
in actually
had
2001.
good data about college players.
So our scientists on
And
something,
know
so I
that.
basically looked
But
at what
it's
scientists
all
were
about
doing
wins.
and how they were having
And
their
there
conversation and what they
isn't
were adding
any
for their
college.
tenure packets.
Mhm.
And what they're doing that's different than what
How-
law
so the
professors
money-
are doing.
right,
So what
Have
do
a law
you,
school
what
win?
it, yes, so
So
in
it's
the
the only kind of
all
how-to
of
thing is that you give a
those
recommended
adhere to
new
that, and that's one of the
flow
things about
for
the
when you're going to
change.
publish something,
You know,
what
in
you should do
basketball,
with it,
plus or
and
minus one,
add
you are
to your
in.
citation in the long run,
It's
but also
all
build your alt metrics
all
so that you can find your CV.
to
Before you went to
win.
do
So we have a lot
seminars,
of data,
I used to
but
work in
how,
treasury
what
20 years
is
ago.
the baseline metric?
You're exactly right, and in our Texas speech, that's one of the things we say, that in real estate it's harder because there's no definition of organizational success.
That Jesse
That
Drucker
you
was
have,
on,
that you have, and you're exactly right, and I think that's part of
was a
the
senior
problem
counsel
where,
at GE
I'm almost like
until this last fall.
Paul, when
And
we
we took some
Masters
GE
for this. I was
engineers,
associate dean for,
maps, sort of blended them
faculty research for
and create
many
an income
years,
statement,
and
balance
so I
sheet,
helped
and
implement all
broke it
these
into 2 teams. one team is the government, they only get the information that they get from published financial rates and all that. The other team is
But it
the
became,
taxpayer, and they have all the separate
kind of
company
this,
financials.
and,
Then we say, government, what are you asking?
Back when we
Government
did
asked, and then they have to decide on that. And we made up a,
Tuesday, right?
we made up a.
My skull.
That was good.